everyone. I'm Melinda Smith, the Executive Director of HelpGuide. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health and natural disasters. Disasters leave more than just physical devastation in their wake. They take a deep emotional and psychological toll on survivors, families, and entire communities. Following the recent wildfires in Los Angeles, many of us are struggling to navigate the trauma, grief, and uncertainty that come with such life-altering events. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Manami Yamamoto, a licensed marriage and family therapist and the founder of the nonprofit clinical practice, Blue Humming Therapy. With extensive experience supporting survivors of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami in Japan, as well as disasters here in California, Manami brings a compassionate and culturally sensitive approach to mental health recovery. In our conversation, we'll explore the common psychological challenges disaster survivors face, the unique struggles of parents and caregivers, and strategies to help individuals and families build resilience. Manami, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Likewise. To start, can you tell us a little bit about your background working with individuals and communities impacted by natural disasters?
Yes. So I founded Blue Having Therapy, it's a nonprofit mental health organization, and we've been working for 9 years. And we're providing psychotherapy, psychoeducation, and mental health consultation to very diverse clients and communities here. And then, so mainly we focus on working with the people in California, but so personally, I'm originally from Japan. So around the disaster, it was the 2011, we had a big earthquake and a tsunami over there. So of course, that's my home country. So I have been working with many art therapists and then professional who can speak Japanese. So we've been in Japan a couple of times and then supporting the survivors over there. So that's kind of, the history I have. And then so pretty much we continue supporting those communities.
So based on your experience, what have you found are some of the most common psychological challenges that disaster survivors face?
Yes. So when we have that kind of disaster, so many people experience a lot of psychological symptoms, like for example, maybe acute stress, trauma like PTSD, and then grief. So these major psychological symptoms we experience. At the same time, people have a lot of emotional reaction, feeling frustrated, stress, anger, sadness, and sense of loss. So people have a lot of emotional reaction, even they don't have a psychological symptoms, but people process a lot of emotional experience.
And how do those experiences shape long-term mental health in your experience?
Yes, so it can be acute stress for some people, but for some people, of course, like a coping speed and a coping strategy is very different, depend on each person. So it's gonna be more like a chronic distress sometimes. So people have more psychological symptoms for long term, or some people have more like a physical symptoms in a long term. So there is some range from acute to more chronic symptoms.
What are your thoughts on kind of early indicators that, some people's acute symptoms are going to turn into chronic symptoms? I know we're going to talk about the strategies you recommend to help avoid that, but do you have any insights into that?
Yeah, so this is kind of very similar to stress symptoms when people experience a disaster. So we kind of try to figure out so what kind of symptoms they express. So sometimes more physical, can be psychological, can be behavioral change. As the reality, people have a lot of behavioral change after they experience a disaster. So behavioral change is another thing. And also cognition. So people have different, cognitive, distortion sometimes. So we really try to see, how people express, those stress and their emotional difficulties. But it really depends on the people. So we really need to figure out so what kind of stress symptoms they have after the disaster.
Hmm. Well, that kind of leads into coping with stress. And, you mentioned that many people neglect their mental health during a crisis, especially those who are taking care of others. So, what advice would you give to a parent or a caregiver? How can they support their child or family members' emotional needs without neglecting their own?
Yes. So for the caregiver and the parents, so they actually holding a lot because they are actually experienced a disaster, but at the same time they need to be playing the role of the caregiver supporting other. So that responsibility is a lot. So that's why sometimes I recommend people they also need a lot of self care. So not just supporting others, they also need to be cared. They also need a support. So that's the first step I usually talk with the people who experience a disaster before helping their children.
Hmm. It makes sense, but I feel like a lot of parents and caregivers feel in the moment, that they don't have any energy or time to spare for themselves. So what would you tell someone who said that?
Yes, so maybe sometimes people can focus on their health skill grounding, breathing, even the brief time. So that kind of helping them to feel grounded or feel a little bit more energy. So I understand people don't have a lot of time to be recovered, but even a little short time, they kind of engage with those grounding, breathing, self care. And I really want them to feel they are actually taking care of themselves. So they are actually recovering, even that small. So kind of engage with those brief self care, and plus, talking to themselves, they are actually taking care of themselves. So that's kind of advice I can give.
Yeah. So basically you think that even small things help. So that's always good to know. Um, we've talked a little bit about parents and caregivers. You've also worked with first responders and other community leaders. What do you recommend for them? Because they're on the front lines dealing with so much stress. What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, I usually really emphasize they are the one really need the care because they have a lot of responsibility and sometimes they kind of pushing themselves to help others. So that's why, as a clinician, so we usually really focus on helping those people who is a community leader, who is more playing the caregiver role for the group or community. So we really emphasize their mental health is so important, and then so provide some psychotherapy or group therapy or psychoeducation, and then make sure yes they want to support community or groups, but also they have a right to take care of themselves. So sometimes people really struggle about the boundary in there, so they kind of pressure they need to help somebody before they take care of themselves.
Mhm.
So yeah, I really emphasize that to those people.
Right. You also mentioned guilt and that a lot of survivors experience that survivor's guilt. What do you recommend to someone who's struggling with that?
Yeah, so guilt is a very natural feeling like a lot of people experience after disaster. So, and then we kind of normalize that experience. Yes, so many people will feel the guilt, but at the same time, so they also need to really think about their life. So their life is going on. And then so in the future, they can help, more people as well. So we don't really deny the experience. Yes, that's a natural feeling and that's normal to feel. But kind of like I try to help them to more like a coping skill. A lot of people actually develop more coping skill after they experience the disaster. So kind of like I try to navigate them to engage with more coping or engage with like more their strengths. So yes, so we pretty much like are kind of helping the people navigating from guilt to more strength based.
You mentioned, well, you emphasize the concept of the inner nurturing figure in your work. So, can you explain what that means and how people can use it to become more resilient?
Yes. So I really like encourage having more like a nurturing parent voice inside. But when we experience like those disasters, a lot of people give extra pressure to themselves. So like people say, I need to be strong, so I need to survive, so I cannot be selfish. So and then those voices are very common, like people have. And then they are very like a judgmental, critical to themselves sometimes. So that's why kind of helping them to have more like a nurturing voice inside. So, like talking to themselves, yes, that's a very challenging experience and feel tired, feel stressed, feel sad. But that's very normal. And then, kind of like, giving more compassion and the care for themselves. So, make sure, like, they have that kind of supportive voice inside. So, that's the way, like, how I have been supporting the survivors.
How hard is it to kind of switch that voice on?
Yes, because like a lot of people have that critical parent voice inside, and in general, they have like the critical parent voice inside, but it got triggered more after experience the disaster. So sometimes like a more community support is helpful. So people kind of like having that voice each other, and then eventually they can actually like take that voice inside. Yes, like we can, take care of ourselves and like, as a community, so we can have the voice. So sometimes like individual work is difficult, but I think with the community, people can have that kind of voice in the community, and then that can lead to more resilience in the community.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting because I feel like you said, a lot of people have that critical inner voice, but if they were talking to a friend or a loved one, yeah, who had the same concerns they did or were going through what they had, they would not be speaking that way to their loved one. So I think it is very interesting what you say about the community. It's a way to reframe it and then realize how lacking in compassion you are to yourself.
Yes, yes. And I think as a community is really supporting those process, and then after like each person has that like a inner nurturing voice, then so they can model the voice to children eventually. So children can understand, okay, feeling stress, feeling a lot of emotional distress, it's normal. But I am seeing my parents how to take care of themselves, and then so, children can internalize the same way what the parents or community does.
How can um, parents manage their own trauma while helping their children process trauma while keeping all their own emotions and fears from overwhelming them?
Yes. So people experience trauma. So again, that's normal. After like experience that disaster, feeling like some trauma is very normal. Feeling stress is very normal. So based on that, so it might take some time. They need more healing time. They need more support. But I usually like encourage the parents and the children. So it's okay, like they feel trauma, and then there is a way to support the trauma healing. And then instead of like suppressing like those symptoms or emotion, kind of like opening up and then talk about acknowledge each other. Yes, that can be trauma, that can be emotional distress, but that's okay. We can like process the trauma. Sometimes like maybe people need to seek like a outside support, like a professional support or community support. But that's okay to process trauma. So that's the way I usually support the parents and the children.
Do children sometimes have different symptoms of stress symptoms and trauma?
Yeah, so sometimes children has a different way to express because maybe like they're expressing with more behavioral change or emotional instability, can be very moody. Some children maybe I don't go to school anymore, so don't talk to parents anymore. A lot of behavioral change I see. It's different from adults. So I think I kind of ask the parents to see if they notice any change about the behavior and emotion, even like a little, maybe it's good to talk about.
You also talk about isolation and that it's a major concern for disaster survivors, especially those who've lost their homes or their community networks, which, that happened to so many people here in Los Angeles with the fires. What role do you believe connection plays in mental health recovery after a disaster?
Yes, so isolation is a really like a major emotional experience, and I know like a lot of people experience that because we often try to support, offer the support, but for the person who experienced that, that disaster, so they have a very mixed feelings. So they appreciate the support from the outside or professional or the world, but same time, so they feel it's more personal experience. Maybe nobody understand how I feel. Maybe nobody can support me. So they have a very mixed feeling when people experience the disaster. So as a clinician or as a supporter, so we really need to understand that yes, we offer the support, but not all experiences are shared. So this is a very, very like a specific experience for some people. And kind of understanding that and then but still continue offering support. Yes, so I cannot be you maybe, but I still want to be here for you. So that kind of, the balanced way of the support is really important for them. And then when people kind of connect with the people with the outside, then people kind of try to integrate themselves. Yes, that's more my personal isolated experience, but I kind of start noticing that people try to support me. So people need to go through that process until they really find a balance in their life.
You mentioned a few different things for connection. Obviously therapy, but peer support, community engagement. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that look like?
Yes, so community support is more people supporting each other in a different way. So some people need more psychotherapy or like a group therapy. Some people want to learn more about how people who experience a disaster has like a psychological symptoms, more like a psychoeducation piece they need. And not just the mental health support. So people need a lot of more logistic support as well. So community really need to think about what kind of support or like a systemic support we need for the people who experience the disaster. So I don't really talk about the mental health, but it's more like a combination. So what is the best support for this community? And it can be different. We cannot really say oh, survivor has a different, the same experience. So we really need to think about what kind of systemic support we need for this community.
Are some non-traditional approaches to healing trauma that are effective, especially for people who have been hesitant to seek traditional therapy?
Yes. So sometimes people don't want to talk about their experience or they're hesitant to talk about their emotion. So for example, some minority culture, like Asian culture, so they usually suppress their individual emotion for the sake of the group. So in that case, talking about their experience or talking about their emotion with the words is kind of like a culturally not correct. So that's why we provide a non-traditional approach like art therapy or more focus on body, like a somatic therapy, mindfulness. So make sure they feel safe to express their feeling, but at the same time, so they can get some mental health support, like a grounding, relaxation. So really need to think about, how much they feel comfortable to talk about their feelings or their experience.
You've touched on this already with that answer, but you've worked extensively in both Japanese and American communities, and like you said, there are cultural differences. One that you just mentioned with focus more on the group than the individual. Um, can you talk a little bit more about that? Are there other differences that you have really found about how these cultures approach mental health recovery, particularly, in the context of disasters?
Yes. So I think the important thing is I usually take more strength based support. So when I was working with people in Japan, so it's more like a collective culture. So more focus on collective type of mental health support. So it can be group therapy. Some people really don't want to receive any psychotherapy or mental health support. So like a turns to more like a psychoeducation, but really focus on a collective collectivism, so they can really focus on the group health more than individual wellness. When I'm working with the community in here, people have a little bit more strength to focus on the personal, like individual. So I will take that strength, so helping them to express their personal experience, but still I try to connect them with the community or groups. So really think about the balance, based on the community I'm facing. So kind of it's kind of same I use a more strength based support, but just based on the community or culture, like a ratio can be different, and then try to find the best balance.
In addition to kind of the cultural differences, many minority and immigrant communities face additional barriers to accessing mental health resources, including, language barrier, stigma. What are some effective ways to provide mental health support to these groups that respects and integrates their cultural values?
Yes, so stigma and the how much a mental health support system they have has a huge impact for our mental health support. So based on that, so sometimes when I work with a minority culture, there is a very strong stigma to mental health. I don't even really talk about the psychotherapy. It's more like guiding them. So try to feel how their body feels or how they feel through the art. So they don't really think, oh, that's like a therapy or that's a clinical support. But they kind of feel safe to engage with those activities. So more really figure out what kind of way they feel more comfortable and feel safe to receive the mental health support.
You mentioned art therapy, right? Did you movement therapy? Was that another one?
Yes, movement therapy, art therapy, it's like a part of express art therapy. So kind of combining a lot of art modalities.
Now I kind of want to switch gears to talk about some of your work. You founded the Mental Health Environmental Change Project. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what its goals are?
Yes. So since the pandemic, so I start working with like people in Japan and also professional in here, US, because I receive a lot of contact from the outside of US. So they want to, have some mental health support, but again, like it's more cultural stigma. So sometimes people feel shame to access the mental support in Japan or in different Asian countries, or maybe they don't have a lot of mental health support system. So they try to seek some support at the outside. And based on that experience, I start providing psychoeducation. And then, so some people from Japan and the US kind of like, support like what I have been doing. And now, like, we continue working as a team. So it's more like a hybrid US Japan project. But so we've been working with, so many people to provide more support to that, like, specific cultures. But like I really appreciate like all the people here. So they really support that kind of hybrid mental health support because we know we have very traditional mental health support in here, but we still struggle to offer the mental health support to minorities or underserved communities in the US. So yeah, really like I try to think about how like we can share our knowledge and experience, but at the same time get the insight from those underserved countries and cultures. And I really like try to integrate the best mental health support for them.
So, beyond individual healing, what systemic or policy changes do you believe are necessary to better support, mental health in general, but in particular, for people who have survived disasters?
Yes. So as I said, like their experience is very personal sometimes. So really need a support system for that. Some people has more long-term support, and then some people need more collective support, like a community support. So really need to provide that kind of support in the long term. And then usually we have very tentative support for those people who experience the disaster, but we kind of need to plan like a little bit long-term support for the individual and the community. So kind of like I try to work with a lot of like a healthcare system, not just a clinician, but more like a healthcare system in the community or nonprofit in the community. And we really need to develop that kind of long-term support for them.
With the Mental Health Environmental Change Project, you are working here in the US and Japan. Are there other countries that are involved in that?
Yeah, for that project, just the US and the Japan, but I personally working with the people in India as well. So yeah, so hopefully so we can support that community as well.
That's fascinating. That's amazing. Have you, well, I don't know what point you are with working with, the Indian community, but have you noticed any interesting kind of cultural differences in how they react to natural disasters or just in mental health in general?
I think in many Asian countries, like accessing mental health support system is really challenging compared to the US. As my gut feeling, so maybe as a mental health support system, maybe 50, 60 years difference. So yes, and then right after pandemic, I provide a psychoeducation to the community in India, but so many people come to the session, and so there has a really great motivation to learn about the mental health. So I can predict like their mental health will be bigger in like 5 years later, 10 years later. But I kind of see that strength as well, but because they are so open to receive the mental health support these days. And then I think, that's really their strength and their really good direction. So, yeah, I'm really happy to support them.
Do you have, well, you're already very ambitious with what you're doing. Do you have any other countries or cultures that you are particularly interested in expanding your work?
I don't really focus on like a specific countries or culture, but so sometimes, so when I work with, especially like when I work with the people who experience those disaster, I kind of see myself as outsider. But for those underserved communities, sometimes the presence of outsider is helpful because in the community, people need to be like, I cannot be selfish or I cannot just seek of, my needs. So people have that kind of like, community or like that kind of cultural pressure inside of the community. So that's why like, outsider is sometimes helpful. People feel more like, relaxed to talk about their emotion with the outsider, like almost like a therapist. So I'm very happy to go anywhere if the community needs my support.
Do you have any closing thoughts to share with us about your goals or things that you think are particularly important for Help Guide people to know?
Yeah, so for people who experience those disasters, I think there are really important things, like two things are really important. So one is they are like, emotional safety because they experience that safety, like, they don't really feel when they experience a disaster. So emotional safety is number one. And then, so, getting back their emotional safety is really important for them. So through the, mental health support or like a logistics support or community support, emotional safety is number one. And another thing is they experience the, the sense of loss maybe in people in LA, so they experience they lost the house, they lost the history, they lost the memories. So they kind of like lost their life, like they have been investing. So they lost a lot of, they experienced a lot of loss.
Mhm.
So that's why, like, really helping them to feel like belonging to somewhere. So maybe they can belong to the community again, or they can feel they can belong to their group or family again. So they have a lot of coping after, like, they experience the disaster, but they can, rebuild that sense of belonging is really important for them. So these things I really want to share with everyone.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you do. We just really appreciate the conversation and you sharing your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate.
All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much. You too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.